Greeting, fellow members of the NCA CPA. Welcome to the 2021 Symposium. I'm Carolyn Woodruff, and I'm here to share with you some knowledge on FinTech and to demystify it. FinTech or financial technology. And I'm here to share with you some of my experiences with FinTech, not only as a domestic relations attorney, but also I finished a FinTech certificate program at Harvard Business School. I'm a member of a FinTech committee on a publicly traded bank, Blue Ridge Bank National Association. I have the AICPA cybersecurity badges and blockchain badges. So it's an area of extreme interest for me, and you as CPAs will understand that this is the financial future. So with that, let's get into the slideshow today. This is an overview presentation. So today we're going to be talking about demystifying FinTech. According to Yogi Berra, it's hard to make predictions, especially about the future. So here we will recall that Henry Ford, an entrepreneur, started a motor company in the early 1900s. He needed investors. He approached his lawyer, who was Horace Rackham, about investing. Horace went to the Michigan Savings Bank to discuss the investment. The banker laughed and stated, "The horse is here to stay. The automobile is only a novelty." Horace decided the banker was incorrect and invested $5,000 in 50 shares. 10 years later, Horace sold his stock for $12.5 million, which is at least $307 million in today's dollars. Reference Robert Shera, 15 worst predictions of all times from Forbes. What is financial technology, or as frequently called FinTech? Financial technology are computer programs and other technology used to support banking, and banks are intermediaries, other financial services. And one of the concerns is disintermediation of banking. In the FinTech world, you will hear the term disintermediation many, many times. And FinTechs tend to be unregulated, as contrasted with the rather serious regulations that banking has. So how many brains does an octopus have? That's about how many brains a FinTech extension goes. So how many brains? Do you know? Put it in the chat box. The answer is 9 brains. So here's some examples of some FinTechs. Have you heard of Zillow Group, Inc.? They price real estate that you can find on the internet. If you've heard of SoFi Technologies, put that in the chat box as yes. PayPal Holdings or Square. If you want a broad spectrum of FinTechs, go to the Barron FinTech Fund, which is BFIXX. What is FinTech? Fast, secure payments, settlement time, goals are instantaneous. Now let's look at the story of blockchain and virtual cryptocurrencies beginning, and modern banking takes off like a rocket. So what are the objectives for this continuing education program? I was asked by the association to talk about basics, to make sure every CPA had the opportunity to understand the basics of some of the FinTech fields. So here we go. Understand blockchain basics. If you're an expert in blockchain, this might not be the course for you. Understand virtual currency basics. Understand trends in banking that relate to FinTech. And then understand North Carolina trends in virtual currency, which probably affect many of the CPA's practices if you deal with the money transfer issues, or perhaps even if you're going to deal with professional sports gambling. What I'm not asked to talk about in this course would be taxation of cryptocurrency or virtual currencies. Those topics will be in another session that you might want to attend. And smart contracts, I mentioned also, but there's another section on predominantly smart contracts. So here we go on our objectives, and it's divided into 4 parts. At the end, there are some bonus slides that we probably won't have time to get through, but you might have some fun looking at them if we don't get to them, on climate change and some other topics, including an AICPA guidebook on financial technology. So here's our blockchain basics overview. So blockchain is essentially a ledger. When you fill up one box with data that's encrypted, you chain it to another box and then chain it yet to another box. It's not really that complicated unless you're doing the programming for it. But understanding the concept, it's like filling in data in a box and then connecting it to another box with a chain. Blockchain originated in 2008, and we really don't know the actual person who originated the blockchain. It was Satoshi Nakamoto, but that's not a real person. What is blockchain? It's using digital signatures, hashing, and proof of work to avoid double spending and fraud. The blockchain enables participants to confidently transfer value using math for validation and verification instead of a trusted third party. And that's in the original white paper that explains blockchain, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. I want you to notice particularly, though, the words trusted and disintermediation, because those are going to be concepts that take us through a flow of FinTech. Trusted and disintermediation of essentially banking. So here's the 5 components that you need to know when you're dealing with distributed ledger technology. It's a database. It has peer-to-peer transmission. Those 2 concepts are pretty obvious to CPAs. It has transparency with anonymity. You don't know who's posting to blockchains necessarily. And it allegedly has irreversibility of records. And I'm going to talk about 2 times that may not be true. One of them is if a hard fork is taken, which we will talk about. And the other is if we get quantum computing that's faster than the current computing of SHA-256. And it's based on computational logic. So when we talk about blockchains, we're talking about 2 types, essentially, at least in the simple terms. We're talking about public blockchains and we're talking about private blockchains. So let's look at the characteristics of each of these types of blockchains. Public ones are permissionless, free for anyone. They are decentralized, and the currency is native. And I've given you some examples of a public blockchain: Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Litecoin. Those are 3 examples. But there are lots of examples of permissionless blockchain. You remember in the question I asked, could you get on a blockchain, the Bitcoin blockchain, without permission? And the answer is yes, but you can get on it and you don't know whose blockchain it is still. Then you have private blockchains, permissioned, access is permissioned, it's more centralized, and typically they do not have a native currency. And an example of this is the Hyperledger. And when we get into discussing what Amazon is doing with blockchain, we will discuss Hyperledger with Amazon, because Amazon is using Hyperledger in its Rent blockchain space program. Blockchain and cryptocurrency have enabled disintermediation and decentralization of financial transactions. Before blockchain, banking was the trusted intermediary. Blockchain becomes a trusted intermediary rather than the bank. So what's the definition of blockchain? Blockchain is a ledger, and it usually is based upon a Merkle tree concept, which we will show you one. Here's a Merkle tree concept. It starts with A, B, C data, and it filters up and goes into one box at the top of the system. It's computer logic or programming logic. Then we have the hash algorithm, which is based upon SHA-256, which is our fastest computing. And it has a 256 hash ID character string. It's derived from induction of string input. and all of the data is encrypted. Allegedly, it cannot be reverse engineered because there isn't the computing power to untangle it. So essentially, this programming logic takes any input and makes it a uniform length. And I'm going to show you an example of that on the next slide. So if we look at here at hashing, we'll see that Fox, F-O-X, 3 letters, cryptographic hash function turns into what's in the digest box, which has the same number of letters in the digest as the input of the red fox jumps over the blue dog. And that is its hash function. Once that hash function is established, it cannot be reverse engineered or determined how the hash was created, as long as we don't exceed the current quantum computing. And it's estimated that it may be 50 years at the rate we're going before we will be able to do something that would unseat the hashing computer speed that we have now. But, you know, with the rate of change, who knows? This will actually be able to penetrate a blockchain if we can exceed the computing speed we currently have available to us. So true or false? We're going on to now some virtual currency basics. This is our topic number 2, and probably something of curiosity to you CPAs. So the US does not have a central bank. True or false? Put that in the chat box. Central bank digital currency is legal tender of a country. True or false? The US is considering a central bank digital currency. True or false? And the 4th question here for your overview is, the IRS definition of virtual currency is the same as the North Carolina definition. True or false? So here are the answers. Thank you for putting them in the chat box. I'll give you one more second to complete the answers. The US does have a central bank, so that is false. It is the Federal Reserve. Central bank digital currency is legal tender of a country, although we don't have that in the United States yet. That is true. The US is considering a central bank digital currency. That is true. There's studies going on right now for a digital dollar between the Federal Reserve and Massachusetts Institute of Technology. The report on that was supposed to be out in late summer, and as of November of the recording of this, that had not happened yet. But we do await that. And we'll talk about China and some other countries and their digital currencies. The IRS definition of virtual currency is the same as the North Carolina definition. That is false. The definitions are different, so stay tuned for what those differences are. This could be important, particularly if you're in the money transmission audit area. For example, Western Union or MoneyGram under the Money Transmitters Act. And if it is different definition for virtual currency than the definition that is used for Internal Revenue Service purposes. So let's look at a virtual currency framework, also called digital currency. And I've got 3 topics here to talk about. Central bank digital currency is a CBDC. That is the legal tender of a central bank, a government, such as the digital yuan in China. Secondly, we've got cryptocurrency, which is not a legal tender of a government. And this is how they're usually used by persons who are experts on this. I will tell you that people use these terms interchangeably in the vernacular. But if you're actually studying this, I think you need to keep in mind the definitions of both North Carolina and the IRS use the terms virtual currency as the header, and these are subparts. And cryptocurrency is a non-regulated digital currency, whereas a central bank digital currency is an official currency of a country. And we'll get into this more later because I think this is very important from an economic point of view for our future in the United States. Now, a type of cryptocurrency that doesn't fluctuate much in the marketplace is a stable coin. It is a variation of cryptocurrency. It is not legal tender, but it is linked to a fiat currency, such as the US dollar. So it is stable, and we'll go into a little bit more, and I'll show you an example of those. So these are really your virtual currency framework. So here is the North Carolina definition of virtual currency: a digital representation of value that can be digitally traded and functions as a medium of exchange, a unit of account, or a store of value, but does not have legal tender status as recognized by the United States government. So notice the not. That's the most important word here, not. So it is not legal tender. So central bank digital currencies of the United States, which we don't have yet, and I'm going to talk about that in just a few minutes, are not included. So this is talking about Bitcoin and going to a Western Union store and buying Bitcoin with a dollar bill and sending it to Mexico would be typically how this would come up. It is regulated by the Banking Commission. Now I'm going to compare this to the IRS definition, just so you who are preparing tax returns know that you may have some differences here. The IRS definition of virtual currency is digital representation of value that functions as a medium of exchange, unit of account, and of store of value. And you notice this leaves out whether or not it's a legal tender of the United States. And we are very much discussing having a digital dollar in the United States right now. So these two definitions today are not as important as they may be a year from now or 2 years from now. But I wanted you to recognize the difference in the two definitions and the word not in the North Carolina versus in the IRS definition. So here we go. Here's your 2020 income tax return. And for the first time, we have a virtual currency question. And I want you to notice they're using the term virtual currency and not cryptocurrency, because cryptocurrency is a subpart of virtual currency. At any time during 2020, did you receive, sell, send, exchange, or otherwise acquire any financial interest in any virtual currency? Yes or no? And it's really defined by a set of FAQs that I think in the tax section, hopefully the teacher and speaker will go over. But I will note that the directions don't deal with if you simply buy investment cryptocurrency or virtual currency and you're holding it in an account and you have not sold it. That seems to be excluded from the definition, but everything else would be. So if you go to that MoneyGram store and you exchange dollars for Bitcoin to send to Mexico, that would come in the exchange category and would be a yes on this box in the Form 1040. So virtual currency is not, that's called cryptocurrency, is not legal government tender. How many of these virtual currencies do you think exist? There are at least 6,500. And I know that's really can't get your head around that many. Some of them are hardly traded. And we hear about the big ones like Bitcoin, but there may be as many as 10,000. Virtual currency typically exists on a blockchain distributed decentralized ledger. So I want to give you 3 illustrations of non-central bank digital currencies. These are in the virtual currencies that are not legal government tender. So we have here Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Tether. And I'm going to talk about each of those. These are not central bank digital currencies, except Bitcoin is a central bank digital currency now of El Salvador. But Bitcoin is traded as BTC on the stock exchange. Bitcoin Cash is BCH, and that was a hard fork, which we'll talk about and illustrate in 2017. Ethereum, ETH, a blockchain with virtual tokens called Ether. And Ethereum enables smart contracts, which you do have a symposium speaker that's primarily dealing with explaining smart contracts, but this will be an introduction for you. Tether, USTD, is a US stablecoin. And what a stablecoin is a blockchain-enabled platform designed to facilitate the use of fiat currencies in a digital manner. For example, a token value of $1. So it's stable and linked to that fiat currency. And I'm going to show you some more illustrations of this. So let's look at Bitcoin with the symbol of BTC. Notice that it has 8 decimal points. So it can be broken down into little tiny pieces. There will be a maximum of 21 million Bitcoins ever mined as of right now, and 18.638 million were mined as of February of 2021. So we're close to the end of the mining of the Bitcoin. Here's the Bitcoin fluctuation. And one thing about these virtual currencies that are not legal tender is a lot of fluctuation. And if you look at the Ether chart, it has a very similar pattern. This starts in October of 16 and goes until fairly recently when I was putting together this presentation. But you can see that it's been up, etc. So there was a hard fork in August of 2017 that's an illustrative hard fork for you. And it's not a dinner fork. It is something that is a fundamental change, more like a fork in the road than a dinner fork. So let's look at how that works. The reason for this particular fork was to process speed, make process speed faster. Bitcoin was very slow. And of course, payment speed is one of the reasons for blockchain and virtual currency, and it just wasn't really working very well. Visa can process 1,700 transactions per second. Bitcoin could only process 7 transactions per second. So to make it faster, they needed to fork off Bitcoin Cash. So here's what they did. Here's the fork illustration. The B in the lime green down the middle is Bitcoin on the permissionless blockchain going along. The hard fork illustrates coming down here, a fork in the road, and becoming BCH. And I think that that's more like a stock split with a 1-for-1. So if you had 1 Bitcoin, you got 1 Bitcoin Cash. But it could move along here faster with less impediment to movement as a payment system. Then you had Bitcoin Gold's hard fork, which is forks up here and becomes the red, and it continues along. So that's the kind of forking you get. And it's very similar, I think, to a stock split. And you'll listen in your tax class that you'll have for the taxation of forks. Our second one we want to talk about is Ethereum, ETH. And I'm talking about this one because it is the basis for most smart contracts. And what's a smart contract? It's not the old traditional thing that a lawyer writes. It's a self-executing contract. Doesn't require a lawyer to write it, doesn't require you to sign stuff usually. It's a self-executing contract with the terms of the agreement between the seller and the buyer written into the lines of the computer code. So think about that. It's programmable logic. So what are some examples for a smart contract? Some smart contract examples. So we use one all the time. And it's the easiest to understand, the computer logic concept behind the term smart contract. So don't let the term overwhelm you. Smart contracts are vending machines. Oh, yeah. So I've got my dollar bill, and some of them probably use Bitcoin. Got my dollar bill, I put it in the slot, I press Diet Coke, and out falls a Diet Coke. That's because the computer program was a smart contract to say, if I pay $1, I get a Diet Coke. Now, there's are developing lots of applications for this, and it's a very fast-growing field, both for lawyers and CPAs who understand this concept of a smart contract because it's a programmable logic that has instantaneous result without any further verification. It is its inherent verification itself. So another one is an insurance payment on death. You sign up for a life insurance policy on John Doe's life. John Doe dies. The beneficiary with the death certificate puts in the death certificate and out come the proceeds without any further involvement of the insurance company. It's just an instantaneous transaction. And another example of this are supply chain smart contracts that have containers that have temperatures. So you want to send something from Minneapolis to Greensboro, North Carolina, but it's supposed to be kept below 32 degrees for the entire trip. You can program a smart contract into the carrying box, and at the point in time of Greensboro, when the box is delivered, it can be instantaneously known if the contractual terms are fulfilled and the below 32 degrees is maintained the whole time so that payment can be instantaneous. But those are three examples that are typical. But smart contracts are becoming a way of thinking. It's a self-executing payment system. You fulfill the duty and you get the money. So Amazon is in the smart contract business. And I'm going to tell you where to look because this is absolutely fascinating to look at. If you want to look at aws.amazon.com, you're going to see a lot of information about smart contracts. And you can have them yourself on Amazon because they rent you space that's metered as you go. So Amazon Managed Blockchain was launched to create and manage scalable blockchain networks using mostly Ethereum. I told you that Ethereum is the permissionless blockchain being used for smart contracts, or Hyperledger Fabric, which has permissioned blockchain capability. So you've got two pretty big options that Amazon is providing where the blockchain has already been constructed and you can do your smart contracts along metered as you go blockchain rental. If you only thought there were tennis shoes at Amazon, think again and look at this website. It's fascinating. Now I'm going to give you a stablecoin example, of which there are several fiat currencies that are linked to stablecoins that are important in our trading society right now. So here we go on Tether, USTD. Tether is pegged to the US dollar. Now, what do we use a stablecoin for? It's a parking place for high frequency traders. So if you're trading on this volatile Bitcoin and Ether that we've been talking about, and you want to step out of the trading market, what you do is you buy some stable coin and called Tether, and you can park the money there and you won't lose money. Of course, there's a vulnerability that a stable coin can lose its peg. It's only a de facto peg. So here is a stable coin chart for that particular stable coin. You'll see that it goes from 99 cents to a little bit over $1, but it stays fairly flat, particularly if you remember the chart for Bitcoin, which was just up and down between like $10,000 and $50,000. So if you're trading in that arena, it's important to know about Tether or some other stable coin that may be pegged to a central bank currency, such as Tether, which is pegged to the US dollar. So here's a word about Diem, and I don't know really what will go forward with this, but here's what it is today. This was Libra. We heard about that until December 2020. Then it became Diem. It's a permission blockchain-based payment system that was proposed by Facebook, and it was going to be backed by reserve assets, and it would be linked to a single currency such as the US dollar. And my thought is that Facebook was trying to get in to be considered to be the United States digital dollar, and that has not been what has happened to date. And I would not at this point expect it to be what happens. So now here's the topic that we all probably don't know so much about unless you've specifically studied it. But I did my capstone project at Harvard in FinTech on the central bank digital currency. It is absolutely fascinating. So here's some thoughts for a central bank digital currency for a digital dollar in the United States. First, we have a central bank called the Federal Reserve, started in 1913. And our Federal Reserve is studying a central bank digital dollar, a central bank digital currency. And there's several ways of looking at this, but the Federal Reserve of Boston, along with MIT, Massachusetts Institution of Technology, did a study, Institute of Technology, is doing a study, and I think it's finished based on some of the comments of some of the Fed governors. It was supposed to be out in August to give the pros and the cons and how a CBDC would happen in the United States. As of this recording, we do not have that report, although we know that some federal Fed governors have spoken out in favor of, we don't see how we cannot do a central bank digital currency, and others saying, like Quarles very recently, that he doesn't see why we really need it. So apparently there's some level of dispute in the governors of the Federal Reserve on what is going to go on in the United States. So why would we even consider a central bank digital currency or a digital dollar? First of all, cross-border payments that need to go across the border to trading partners at the speed of light, or that's just at very fast speeds. Then you've got the international sanctions issue. So if the US issues sanctions against a country, North Korea, and China has a central bank digital currency that is used around the world with some of the developing country trading partners, the US sanction can kind of just be totally bypassed. And essentially the digital yuan, of which I'll get to in a moment, becomes weaponized against us. And also, I consider it to be the US position as the global reserve currency, which we currently are, but we've lost position on that. China has made affirmative statements that they do not seek to become the global reserve currency, but I'll let you decide if that is a credible statement when you hear what they are doing with regard to digital currencies. And I've actually included a link here that takes you to Fed Chairman Powell's statements on a central bank digital currency. And I think it's a short little video and it's worth watching. So I put a world map here because this is what I think illustrates to me the status currently of central bank digital currencies. And basically, you'll see this orange here on the right. That's China. It's in the pilot stage, and they're very advanced in the pilot. They started in 2014 developing the digital yuan, and they have recently walletized lots of citizens with digital yuans for free so that they could learn to spend it and account for it in their digital wallets on their cell phones. Recently, $6 million was given to citizens in one city in China, or the digital yuan equivalent of $6 million, to just go spend it wherever they wanted to, just to get used to using a digital currency. You'll see that Canada is blue and all Russia is blue. That means it's actually in the development stage of a central bank digital currency. You'll also see a lot of South America is in development stage and some of South Africa. So these countries are on the go to follow China. You will see that in yellow, which is we're still researching it, is the United States. El Salvador has a central bank digital currency. They adopted the Bitcoin, which has creating a lot of confusion in El Salvador. And the Bahamas, it's not well pictured on this particular map, but they have one called the Sandbox, and we'll get to that a little bit more. So here's some challenges the octopus has with all of its tentacles on a central bank digital currency, a CBDC. Data privacy. There's transparency and traceability. You know, we like our currency transaction reports in the United States. We like know your customer. The banking likes its anti-money laundering. And with an anonymous blockchain, it is sometimes very hard to follow exactly what is going on and who is doing it in your blockchains with your digital currencies. And know that Bitcoin is anonymous. And we have one government, the government of El Salvador, that has adopted an anonymous currency on a blockchain as its central bank digital currency. And there's a lot of suggestions of the crime capability in the money laundering arena that leaves open. I hear talk about anti-money laundering and counterterrorism and financing of sanctions. I mentioned about the ability of the digital yuan out of China to help North Korea bypass the US sanctions if they can totally bypass the US currency. And then cybersecurity. There could be multiple points of attack that I think is one of the Federal Reserve of the United States problems with a large number of participants, and it might be hard to determine where an attack is coming from. So here's the status of the CBDC worldwide on some of the bigger players. People's Bank of China has a digital yuan. They are ready to go and are going with it. They intend for it to fully replace all of their other currencies. The proprietary blockchain is what they have. They have their own blockchain and they have their own digital wallet system. And this is what they've been testing. And they're at a point that the testing is ready to launch, is ready to finalize. The European Central Bank has a digital euro already. It's going to complement cash and not replace cash. It's not going to rely on a blockchain. It will rely on a digital wallet. And there is a lot of subtle difference when you start reading about how this works. And it's really beyond the computing technology of this particular course and the 50 minutes that I was allotted. El Salvador adopted Bitcoin as its CBDC, and the Bahamas adopted the digital Bahamian sand dollar. And one of the interesting things to me about the sand dollar is that MasterCard set up a sandbox in Bahamas and said they will set one up anywhere any country wants to launch a central bank digital currency to make sure that that central bank digital currency will work on MasterCard. So the sand dollar from the Bahamas will work on MasterCard worldwide. And the Bahamas saw that as an advantage. So let's talk about banking and a central bank digital currency and what the future banking holds. FinTechs are about banking and payments. So FinTechs are acquiring banks, mostly state chartered banks at this point. Lending Club acquired Radius Bank. So we have a marriage of a FinTech, an unregulated, acquiring some level of regulation when they acquired Radius Bank. So here's Lending Club Bank NA. And the big difference here is the ability to take deposits. You have to have some kind of banking charter to be able to take deposits. The OCC is the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. It is the regulator of the national banks. And just for an overview, to refresh your recollection, a national bank has a national bank charter with the Federal Reserve and is regulated by the OCC and can operate in any of the 50 states, unlimited. A state bank charter is by the Banking Commission of a state and has FDIC insurance, but can only operate within a particularly given state. So here in July 22, 2020, Federal Reserve members got guidance for national banks that banks could start having cryptocurrency services, storage, and hot and cold wallets that they offer. The OCC also gave additional guidance to national banks in January 4 of 2021 that we could have independent node verification, which is essentially blockchain, blocks and nodes talking to each other, probably connected with a chain, and the authority to issue stable coins. I remember the stable coin was the Tether that I showed you that has a link or a fiat currency that remains very stable in value. So we have our first digital bank, fully digital bank in the United States. And guess where it was? Anchorage, Alaska. It was chartered this year. It's a conditional charter, but it's a major milestone for the crypto world, and it's the first to have both tech and regulatory clarity. And it is you can get a specialty FinTech charter. So here is Anchorage Bank, raising the bar for digital asset finance. And interestingly, the U.S. Marshal's Office is using this digital bank when it seizes crypto assets from criminals and to house the storage of the seizure. So that's, I think, just an interesting fact of what's going on with this particular type of situation. So we have had one major lawsuit, Lacewell versus the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, or the OCC, challenging that there could not be these special purpose FinTech banks. But so far, even though this one in the Second Circuit was really decided on a standing issue, so far the OCC has prevailed in being able to charter especially FinTech banks. So what's the future of FinTech and banking and money transfer? Let's look at what JP Morgan's doing. This one blows my mind. They're testing blockchain payments between satellites orbiting the Earth. They have their own coin, the JPM coin. They're accepting Bitcoin for business, and they're already using blockchain on cross-border transactions for speed. Bank of America has 60 blockchain-related patents. Visa and MasterCard have sandboxes for the CBDC in many, many places. It's important for Visa and MasterCard in holding their position in the market to be able to be the credit card for a central bank digital currency, if you think about it. So they're really at the forefront of the sandbox to test. North Carolina has breaking news in the regulatory sandbox area, FinTech and blockchain. We need to look at recently passed North Carolina General Statute, Chapter 169. It is effective October 15, 2021. And a regulatory sandbox is a place to play with concepts and ideas. And this regulatory sandbox is going to have the ability to test ideas such as smart contracts, blockchain, and you can test it with consumers under a limited authority of a license that will be temporarily given to the entrepreneur by the North Carolina Innovation Council. The definition of FinTech under the Act is certain innovative products or services that support the provision of banking or financial services. There's also a definition of InsurTech. You might recall that I mentioned smart contracts involving life insurance. Certain insurance products or services that support the provision of insurance services. There's a definition of blockchain now in North Carolina. Blockchain is an electronic method for storing cryptographically secure data in a database or distributed ledger technology that is decentralized, consensus-based, mathematically verified, and distributed across multiple locations. The state agencies that are responsible for this are the Office of the Commissioner of Banks and the Department of Insurance. Again, I think that this will advance North Carolina in the entrepreneurial business world and make North Carolina attractive. The entire statute should be at the appendix of your materials, and I would encourage you to read it. Now we'll look at the North Carolina Money Transmitters Act, which we mentioned before when we talked about the definition of virtual currency in the United States. So here's an example of a money transmitter in North Carolina. May 21, 2021, MoneyGram announced that customers can purchase Bitcoin with cash in North Carolina in the MoneyGram stores. So you have your dollar, you go in, you buy a Bitcoin, and then you can send it to your relative in El Salvador, or you can send it to your relative or whoever you want to send it to in Mexico, would be a common one. So what happens is, though, under that line of the 1040 that I showed you on the tax return, that would be an exchange that would have to be reported on a 1040. So CPAs keep that in mind if your tax return prepares. So here's some specifics of the NC Money Transmitters Act. It's licensed by the Office of Commissioner of Banks, and traditional banks with bank charters, either licensed by the National Federal Reserve or by the state, are excluded from licensure. And it only regulates virtual currency that's not legal U.S. tender. So it won't regulate, as it's currently written, a central bank digital currency if that ever happens in the U.S., which I believe that it will. So here we've got objectives that we have talked about today: understanding blockchain basics, understanding virtual currency basics, understanding trends in banking, and virtual currency. So if you remember on blockchain, we talked about you can have a permissioned or a permissionless blockchain. We talked about anonymity. We talked about it's a ledger. It's a ledger that's encrypted. It's a ledger that's encrypted with a SHA-256. The encryptions are the same lengths. And as of right now, you can't reverse engineer the hashing process because we don't have any computing that's fast enough to undo what was done. It's like when you put a steak into a meat grinder, you can turn the steak into hamburger, but you can't turn the hamburger back into steak. And that's essentially what went on with blockchain. The virtual currency basics. Remember, the term is virtual currency. When you hear cryptocurrency, you're talking about an unregulated currency that may be able to be traded, but it is an unregulated currency. So the better term, and the one that is used both in the North Carolina definition and the IRS definition, is virtual currency. The virtual currency of the U.S. will be a central bank digital dollar if we get one. And we are studying getting one. China already has the digital yuan, as do other countries. And then you have the virtual, you have also, I talked about Bitcoin and Ether, and I talked about the stable coin. Then we want to understand trends in banking. I mean, banking is just exploding because one, banking has to keep up with fintechs. And what you're seeing is sometimes something that is akin to a fintech and a bank. And you've seen a lot of mergers and acquisitions in that area. And I believe that in a few years, we will see a blended product, and the traditional branch banking and those kinds of things are not going to exist, or not going to exist much anymore. It's going to be something in between what we have now and what would be Lending Club. It's going to be a blend that we're going to blend it out, and it'll all stabilize, but it'll be some regulation involved. I think the unregulated has not even worked in China, and China has really put its foot down on the dereg side and basically kicked most of it out of the country of China. I suspect the United States ends up doing that at some point, at least on a mass basis. Then we have the North Carolina trends in virtual currency. I gave you the definition. I talked about the sports betting. I talked about the North Carolina Transmitter Act that's in existence. So that basically would be your basics of blockchain, virtual currency, and banking and fintech, and demystifying it. So here's the thing. Put your questions in the chat box, and I will try to answer all of them. I am live with you. Now I have a few other slides if you want to stay around. In your packet, you will have these slides. I am going to at some point run out of time on the 50 minutes that I was assigned, but here we go, and I'm going to try to give you a little bit more information. I had some CPAs that wanted to really talk about climate and how the climate is affected by the financial technology industry. But first, I'm giving you how to get in touch with me, and here's some bonus slides. FASB has not come out with any particular guidance, but the AICPA has a practitioner's guide. I have given you the site for the practitioner's guide on virtual currency and crypto assets and how to record them under GAAP. And this is the suggestions of the AICPA. IRS guidance. I think you'll get this in the other course, but here's a slide that tells you where we are on guidance that takes it through 2014 to the FAQs, which are the basis for the tax return in 2020 definitions. So that will be helpful, I think, to you as just having this as a reference guide and having it in one place. I want to talk about this Ethereum and the DAO hack, because this blends into cybersecurity. The DAO is a decentralized autonomous organization. It was launched in 2016. It raised $150 million of Ether on a token sale. Then there was this big hack, 2016 in June, and the hacker drained $50 million. Well, you remember that little chart I showed you about drawing forks? What Ether did was back it up on the blockchain and hard fork it off before the hack, and all the money was refunded. Think about that. It was reversible because the blockchain was forked prior to the hack. And that's something akin to what may have happened at Colonial, although it's at Colonial Pipeline, but it's been kind of secret exactly how all of that was pulled off. But that is one that's reported. Make crypto green. Crypto takes a lot of electricity. Let's look at how much. Bitcoin mining and Ethereum, huge electricity. 91 terawatts of electricity annually to Bitcoin mine. We're almost finished with Bitcoin mining, though. We've used the electricity. Finland, that's about like 5.5 million in Finland a year, or 0.5% of the entire world's electricity, or 7 times the electricity used by Google. Ethereum, in a single transaction, uses as much electricity as a US household in a week. The carbon footprint is equal to 140,893 Visa cards and 10,595 hours of watching YouTube. There are gas fees, and when you see gas fees on a cryptocurrency such as Ethereum, that means they're charging you a surcharge for the electricity that it cost. I'm giving you here a Bitcoin address and what it looks like. If you want to look, you can look that up. You can't get on it, and you can't know whose it is, but you can look at it and see what it looks like just for information. Citigroup, Goldman Sachs, and Morgan Stanley all are using crypto and blockchain for wealth management. This is important on the disruption concept for regulation versus deregulation, centralization versus decentralization, intermediation versus disintermediation. So essentially, banking is regulation, centralization, and intermediation. FinTech financial affairs are deregulation, decentralization, and disintermediation. I wanted to talk a minute about China's Dian Rong Lending Club. This was the early lending club of China. It was privately owned. It had small loan sizes, 1,500 to 150,000. There was no credit bureau reporting, and it was just had Ponzi schemes and fraud schemes. And finally, the Chinese government came in and regulated this and set up some stringent regulations and eventually stopped it altogether and just said, we're only going to use our digital yuan in China. I'm sure you've all been reading about that in the news. It's the Wild West. Non-fungible tokens are NFTs. And this is just honestly incredible. The digital art, video clips, and collectible e-cards that are sold in the virtual world. The Basquiat painting sold for $93.1 million. It's this, I've got over here on the left part of my slide, kind of a digital reenactment of what that painting is, but somebody paid $93 million. An old YouTube video where a baby bit his brother's finger sold for $760,999. And the interesting thing, if you're dealing with these as a CPA, these non-fungible tokens, the rights are not always so clear on who owns them. Again, if you have questions, I'm here to answer them. I hope you've learned something about cryptocurrency, virtual currency basics, blockchain basics, and where banking is heading.